it's Michelle again, and today we're going to talk about historic ceramics. And so when you're looking at historic ceramics, there's kind of three broad categories. The first is earthenware, and that's like terracotta, so those big orange pots that you plant flowers in. So it's fired, but not super hot, and that means it's pretty porous, so water and things can kind of soak into that pottery. We don't find a lot of that in this area. And then the second is stoneware. And stoneware is fired hotter, so it's less porous, but it still usually gets glazed so that things can't soak into it at all. And then the third is porcelain, and porcelain has been fired so hot that it has essentially turned to glass. So it doesn't necessarily need a glaze because it's pretty impervious to anything just because of its firing. But we don't have any porcelain that I'm aware of from the Parkin site historically. But mostly what we have is that stoneware category. And so the first one, the typical stoneware thing that I think of are these big, thick, heavy kind of vessels. And they have a glaze often called salt glaze. And it's made literally with salt. And typically we think of that as kind of a brown or a gray, but it does come in other colors. This one's blue. And the vessels that are made of this kind of stoneware are usually really big storage vessels. And so this is a kind of big, you can see this inside thing, and it's got this little broken piece of handle from the outside. And so this was probably a big jug that stored liquid. And then this obviously has a bigger opening, so it was some other kind of big storage vessel. And just to look at jugs really quick, this one isn't made quite the same way, but this is kind of what a big jug would look like with that handle there, just to give you an idea. But then, so that's how you would store large amounts of food, maybe back in your kitchen or in the cellar. But then when you served the food, you would typically, most people would typically use slightly nicer stuff, and that we call whiteware. And that's pretty much just a descriptive term. You can see that it is white inside, but you can also see that it's a little bit dirty. And like I said, it is glazed with a lead glaze on the outside because the firing is not as hotly fired as porcelain, so it's not glass, and it does soak in a little bit of stuff as it sits in the ground. So over time, just some of the dirt and stuff from this being broken and thrown away has soaked into those edges. But the glazed part is still nice and clean. And so this guy here, you can see it's got this little foot on the bottom, and so it was probably part of a plate. Just sit like that. And then I've got another one that, again, this little foot, but this we have the rim edge here. So we can tell that this was for sure a plate. It would have sat, and it was probably a fairly small plate, and it might have been part of a tea set. Because what I also have is this bottom of a teacup. You can see this is the foot, and I've got no rim pieces, but you can see how it comes up on all edges. And so this would have been a little teacup that would have perhaps sat on that little plate. And it's got this white or clear lead glaze on it to keep all the liquids in and not soaking into my little glass or my little cup. And then I've got this little piece again of a rim. You can see this rim isn't perfectly round, so there would have been a little bit more decorative style on this plate edge, or probable plate edge. It's also got a little bit of decoration on there, but I don't know if you can really see that very well in this video. I'll maybe stick a picture in there. But yeah, so that's kind of the categories of historic pottery and a little bit about how they're made. But what's really cool about historic ceramics is kind of the various types of decoration that we see on them. And so there's a lot to talk about there, so I'm not going to get into it in this video, but we'll talk next week about the decorative styles, especially of whiteware ceramics, because that's what we find most of here, and how the decorative styles change through time, and so how that helps us figure out what time period some of these pieces of pottery came from. And then we'll also talk about the maker's marks and how that helps us tell when the pottery was made and where it was made, and sometimes, you know, where it came from to get here to Arkansas. So again, like I said, we'll talk about all of that next week, but this is just kind of a really brief introduction into what we look at when we're looking at historic pottery, and I will talk to you again then.